Hello, welcome everyone. I think whenever we talk about the data, today especially, we are right now in the 21st century, it's a great story. It's like the data is giving so enormous opportunity in terms of how to optimize the games, how to optimize the business. Actually, amazing story, amazing experience. But I have the feeling that very often when the story comes to the day-to-day life, when it comes to putting that to the real activity, this story looks a little bit differently, yeah? Because this amazing approach around using data, when we need to translate it into specific actions, specific day-to-day operations, it has many different challenges. So that's why today I would like to share a few tips how to approach that stuff actually from starting points when you are like being small studio to when you are actually getting to much more sophisticated business, when you are getting bigger and more sophisticated games. So today I will share with you analytics framework that you can use to actually improve your analytics and by that gaming abilities at the company. So when we talk about how to start easy, then how to go deeper, how to actually look for the value for the game, and then how to test actually. And all that stuff I will be sharing based on the Firebase. I think it's a really amazing tool that can be used by any company at any size to improve the abilities, improve the business in scale. It's actually used right now by more than 1 million of apps. It's actually the reach and the number of apps using Firebase is actually increasing. So I think it's a really great way to actually improve the business. So if we start from the beginning, I think working with the data, with Firebase, with any other tool, it actually starts with finding good ideas, finding good hypotheses that actually we will validate with the data. And actually, it can start with very simple ideas like, okay, if I have specific tutorial in my game, how it's important for the business? Is it actually improving the game or not? And in this case, it can really start from very simple segmentation, trying to understand how actually people are using my game. So in this case, if we have all users and we see that on one side, we see the ARPU for the people who finish the tutorial is much higher, which means that in general, actually, the tutorial is actually helping to monetize the game. But then on the other hand, we see that just less than 3% of the users are actually using the tutorial. And then if we go deeper and try to understand how to improve that usage of that tutorial, we can go further and ask, how actually is the flow for this tutorial? And we see in this case that, in general, it's not that the people do not see the tutorial, because they, from the people who opened the app, and then a lot of people started to see that tutorial, but actually not many people actually finished that tutorial. And in this case, the insights are actually starting from having specific curiosity at the team. And I think that's actually how the gaming studios really need to start working with the data, having somebody who is really interested in the data, having some need and some curiosity for asking questions. But that's, of course, just for the beginning, yeah? Because if we go further, if we have more sophisticated game, or we are getting bigger business, such segmentation will not be enough, because it's too simple. Even if we go further, asking ourselves, okay, if we have specific events happening at the game, what is the demographic behind those events? And yeah, and we see in this case that even in that game, majority of the audience is actually female. For the specific features like this one related to the tutorial, it's actually even, we have even more females there, yes? On one side, the game is for female, but then that we have even overusage of tutorial by women, which means that probably his structure is done rather for female than for men. But again, it's just the beginning, because once we have bigger business, we need to go further. And in this case, we need to go deeper. And amazing thing around the Firebase is actually you can not just using the console to see the data, but you can actually send the data to BigQuery, where actually in BigQuery you don't have the data delay, because in using the console you have a few hours delay. In BigQuery it's near the real time. And then, what is more, either you can just start to analyze the data by SQL, or what is even better, actually, you can create a lot of different data studio dashboards that are actually integrated in the BigQuery. And with that, if you have all those different data studio, and there are a lot of interesting tutorials how to create such dashboard, many challenges that are related to the using Google Analytics for Firebase, which is, for example, in the console, you don't have really the default reports that allow you to segment the retention reports. With Data Studio, you can actually, based on the BigQuery, you can do it. And if we go even further, there is actually more and more interesting features actually coming to the space. Just recently, who of you are using Crashlytics inside Firebase? Yes, so if you are using Crashlytics, because I think, again, it's an amazing tool, just recently, there is ability to send the Crashlytics data to the BigQuery. And again, if you have access to the raw data, which on one side is giving the advantage because in the console you have just the data for 90 days. In BigQuery, you can just store the data for a longer time and then start to analyze the trends and analyze the correlation, for example, between the Crashlytics data and the conversion rate or first time to deposit and so on. So again, we can send that Crashlytics data in BigQuery, and again, not just use the data we have in the pictures and the image we have in the console. We can just create our own dashboard based on the Data Studio. And just recently, Google released a few tutorials how to create it, step by step, how to actually use the queries to create very simple and nice Crashlytics dashboard done via Data Studio, where actually we can really adjust the way we want to see the data to our needs. But that's actually just the way to get to the data. What is actually even more important is actually what we can do with this data. And I think the need to use the raw data, it's actually not just around let's create a dashboard that gives us the ability to see the data in the way we want to see, but it's actually even much more around how to actually understand what is the most important stuff inside our game. And I think more and more actually companies are trying to understand what are like the most important features in the game. Because inside the game, we can have a lot of different events, like users are going to different levels, users are getting different currencies. And it's not really easy sometimes to understand which of those features are actually the most important for the game growth. And why it's actually so important? Because on one side, very often, when we want to do the test, it's easy to do the test based on the conversion rate. Okay, I'm doing some A/B tests based on conversion rate, based on the payer rate, but then there is very often the challenge around the data. Usually the conversion rates are not very high, so we need to have really a lot of data to actually be able to run those tests. If we find another feature that have much higher frequency in our game, we can actually run those tests towards that feature. And then with that, we have actually much more data and much bigger ability to run those tests. And then the second reason is that a lot of providers providing the opportunities for growth, like Facebook or Google, that are actually selling advertising, they are giving the ability to not just send the users to your games, but send the users who have higher chance to finish specific event. I don't want just installs. I want the installs of the people who actually, there is much higher chance that actually they will get at least to the third level because based on my data, I understood that this third level is actually, it's very high correlation between this third level and actually payer rate. So more and more actually companies are trying to measure the data, and on one side using this BigQuery, it's actually, that's why important, because you have the access to the raw data. And with that, we can actually look at our data, as in this case, we have one example of the game, when on one side we have the column which is showing the payment, so we have the data at the user level, with the information, what is the status of the specific user, okay, what different battles he did, what different currencies he bought, what is his state, and if he paid or not. And then looking at the decision tree, decision tree is actually one of the ways to approach the data when we are looking at, okay, let's look if the user will pay, yes, no. Does he currency, yes, no. And then that's the decision tree. By that we can actually try to understand the implication in game. But of course, it's so not easy, because if we look at how the user behaves in the game, very often the behavior is not really linear. So we would expect that correlation and different behavior related to different features of the game are very linear, but not that the case. We would expect that, okay, that's the behavior in terms of the people who got the diamonds and earned them, but the reality is much more difficult. So that's why even if we have that raw data, very often we need to use much more sophisticated ways to approach the data. One of the methods that is used at Google quite extensively for such analysis is actually the method that is called extra random forest. That is actually taking at the decision tree, but looking at that from many different dimensions. Because in this case, with the decision tree, there is the challenge that there are many different features, so at the end of the day, you don't know which of those features is root, which is actually the variable. So one of the ways is actually, for example, a method called extra random forest, what it's actually the forest of the trees, when we actually are going with many different iterations, when we are starting with many different features, and every time we have different features, the root, and then we're going farther. And then as the kind of endpoint for such analysis, we can look at the data and see, okay, that's our result. It's actually real result from one of the analysis. When we see at okay, those are the features, and that we see the fast battle, and then we see correlation event and correlation active event. So correlation event is actually showing how frequency of the specific event is actually increasing or decreasing the chance of being the user of the paid user. And then a correlation active user, if the information that is showing how likely user goes through specific event is actually how likely he actually is to become the paid user. And I think the way how the gaming companies work, it's actually enough that you in the team somebody who knows Python a little bit, he has some knowledge around the data science, and he can actually, having the access to the raw data, he can actually go through such iterations, trying to find, okay, what is the growth engine for my specific game. I really actually encourage you to look at this from a perspective, because what I see, many companies are using the Firebase and analytics data in Firebase, but they are just looking from time to time at the data, and actually they are not really doing a lot with this raw data they have the access to via BigQuery. So with this, once we have this basic segmentation, once we have this deeper approach to the data, we can even go further. We can ask ourselves, okay, how to actually have the different ideas for testing. And it can start from very simple tests that you can do via Firebase. And that's actually one of the examples of the tests done for a hyper-casual game of tap-tap games. They're actually using quite extensively Firebase. and we see that they are testing a few different types of the games. Control group, much more difficult game, and having different mechanics. And then based on that, they saw, okay, which of the specific game was the best in terms of highest possible retention for the user. But then from that, we can go even further, trying to understand what is the optimal point for monetization of the game. Let's test the different approaches for monetization. And in this case, Gaga actually, they use the Firebase to test different monetizations models. So in this case, they tried to test, okay, let's have situation when the user will get a different amount of reward ads, different amount of banner ads, trying to understand what is actually optimal point of what is the best idea for having specific number of ads per user, yeah? And then in this case, they got to the test when actually they discovered, okay, that's the optimal point we can have at our game, because in this case, it's increasing our revenue, and it's actually not affecting strongly our engagement metrics as well. But then we can even go further, and I think one of the most amazing points in Firebase is actually predictions that were added to Firebase, which is actually the way to have the very sophisticated TensorFlow technology that is used quite extensively actually in Google products, and how actually it can be used by the companies that are not even very sophisticated in this machine learning approach. And how the predictions work, they actually work in the way that the system is looking at the users from the last 100 days, and it's trying to predict their behavior for the next 7 days. So with that, if we discovered, based on the previous analysis, that there are specific events that are very important for our business. So in this case, for example, we have the more like hardcore game, and we discovered this joining a league is actually a very important point in the user journey, because once the user joins the league, then it's much higher probability that he will stay with the game, and then at a specific point he will pay. Based on that, we can actually decide, I want to predict what are the users who are predicted not to join the league. And then to those users, I can run specific A/B tests. So I can change the behavior of the game to those users, or I can try to reach out to them, for example, via some messages. And there are a few very interesting cases. One is coming from Australian company when they actually use the Firebase predictions to increase retention. That's the game Dan the Man. Quite good game, you see by the results. The score 4.8, and then quite a nice number of installs. And what they did, they actually used the Firebase predictions to decrease the improve the retention. So how it worked? They test 3 types of users. We have the control group, then we have users who got at least to the 3rd level, because they wanted to test if giving some additional gifts will have positive influence on the final outcome in terms of retention. So they have the control group, that the people who didn't get these additional gifts at all. Then they had the group, the people who got at least to the 3rd level, because from the previous data, that was the event that was very important for them. And then the 3rd group they tested on was actually the people who were predicted by the system as potential churners. So those are people who actually were predicted to churn in the next days. Those people actually got this specific gift as well. And you see that even if they look at the users who, based on the experience, who were actually very likely to be in the test, like the people who got to the 3rd level, in this case, the results for the people who were predicted at the churner, and then the game gave some additional gift based on that behavior, they were actually able to increase the 3rd day retention date by quite extensive amount. And I think the beauty of this is actually that it can be done even by small studio in the same way it is done by bigger company. Okay? And in this case, we can actually test different monetization models, trying to understand which users are more likely to monetize via ads, which users are more likely to monetize via in-apps. I think a lot of amazing ideas how to do it in practice. And if you are interested in that, just go to the Google and type Firebase Code Lab monetization, and then you will find many good tutorials step-by-step how to test different stuff for monetization. So summarizing, if you look at using the Firebase for your analytics needs, you can just start very easily trying to get some ideas for segmentation, then go to the raw data that you can actually use to understand what is the growth driver of your game, and then use it as the way to actually have some ideas for A/B testing, especially including predictions, because I think it's one of the most amazing features added to Firebase in the last months. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time. I hope it's useful. That's the contact to me if you have some like questions or something, and of course feel free to ask those questions right now as well.
Could you tell us how many people should we have in groups to A/B test something?
So like the more the better, but for example, if you want to have some results for predictions, like you want to have results for predictions, the minimum amount of data is that you need to have at least 500 positive and negative results. So for example, if I show this example with the joining the league, you would need at least 500 people who joined the league and 500 people who did not join the league to have the results for that specific prediction. So then if we go to the A/B testing, that of course much wider question, because it goes to much wider question around what you are going to test. There is this famous saying, no pain, no gain, which actually, if we talk about A/B testing, it goes to the situation, do you want to test like more crazy idea or just very basic stuff? Because very often I saw many different tests, and most of those tests were around, okay, let's test red versus green button. And then in majority of cases, people just didn't care. It's like, in many cases for us, because it's our baby, we love that game, we play every day, it's something that we discover and we find like the difference is very small details. For many users, it's not the case. So if you are testing two totally different levels versus, okay, the very easy level versus the very difficult level, which is usually quite significant change, then you can expect much higher change, but both for positive and negative. Which means that in this case you will need much smaller number of users, and usually a few hundred of users for each testing group can be even enough. But if you are testing and then like 2,000 should be really enough per test. But if you are testing very small differences, then you need to have much wider group. Again, testing is actually about balancing the result and the risk, because it's either you have higher risk and higher result, or you have smaller risk, but then you have smaller difference in the change, which means you need to have a much higher number of users, or you end up with the test which doesn't have actually any significant results.